You just can't weed and feed and seed. Death begins in the gut. Aging is actually caused by...
Who are you? What the hell are you doing here?
I have no idea. Somebody bought me they didn't even buy me a plane ticket, so I came in.
Man, I thought I was at bottom of the barrel. So, I feel like you're one of the greatest, right? And there's always controversy going on. And are you the most hated doctors in nutrition or what?
Oh, I hope not. But, there's an intro into my new book, The Gut-Brain Paradox. There's a dedication to a doctor from Vienna by the name of Semmelweis. That may not mean much to you, but Semmelweis back in the 1800s was a OB/GYN resident at the Viennese hospital. And getting an infection during childbirth was the major cause of maternal mortality from childbirth. And it was rampant. And he noticed that his professor, they'd always do autopsies before they went and delivered babies, and they didn't wash their hands. And his professor actually nicked himself with a scalpel during an autopsy, and he died of an infection a few days later. So Semmelweis says, wait a minute, there's something going on here. We shouldn't be doing autopsies and then going to deliver babies. There's something going on. This is before bacteria were known. In Vienna, there was a midwife hospital that also delivered babies, and they didn't have the problem. And so Semmelweis graduated, and he became a professor, a young professor, and he says, well, from now on, I'm going to make everybody who ever does an autopsy wash their hands before they go deliver a baby. And his results suddenly became as good as the midwives, but his colleagues, his professors, were so jealous that he would stand up to obviously what you should do,
Yeah.
that they actually declared him insane. I kid you not. They kicked him out of Austria, committed him to an insane asylum in Bucharest, and he died beaten to death in an insane asylum. 8 years after his death, bacteria were discovered, and he became kind of the patron saint of hygienic progress in...
Oh man, that's a crazy story. But I guess that happens to all the geniuses, right?
One of my favorite lines that guides me. Did you ever see the movie Moneyball?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the guy starts using computer programming to
Yeah.
figure out who to have and who not.
Those damn Red Sox.
Yeah, and he gets, the general manager of the Red Sox calls him. The owner of the Red Sox says, hey, I want you to be my manager. He says, no, you don't want me. Everybody hates me. And he says, look, those who go through the wall first always get bloodied. Those who go through the wall first always get bloodied.
Well, thank God for people like you. I know it's not easy. Lectins. You're saying every culture has eaten beans for centuries. Has beans been killing them slowly?
No.
No.
Cultures have always figured out how to detoxify plants that want to kill them. Beans have their own microbiome. If you've ever soaked beans, you know that a foam occurs on the top of the soaking. That's the fermentation process that actually eats the lectins. But nobody does that anymore. Like in Italy and Tuscany, you soak your beans for 48 hours before you cook them. The Incas always let their quinoa rot. In other words, they fermented it and then they cooked it. And it's not on our package directions. So I study how cultures have overcome these problems. Why do 3 billion people eat white rice instead of brown rice as their staple? Because the lectins are mostly on the brown part. And it's hard to take the hull off, yet 3 billion people go to the trouble of taking the hull off of rice.
Why do you think we're going against historical culture so much in modern times?
It's not convenient. We love convenience. America was made on convenience. Nobody wants to cook anymore. Come on.
I feel you, but I feel like it's in every society, because I've talked to a lot of people today. We had the dentist in here before, and for millions of years, we didn't brush our teeth and we didn't have to worry about these things. But somehow we seem to think that we need regular cleanings and we need fluoride in our water and all these other things to keep us safe. And, why is it, we have this misnomer that like the ancient people were stupid, right? And they were archaic and we're advanced and we're smart. So don't you think it's a little bit more than just laziness?
No, it's, really we've lost touch with our great-grandparents' wisdom. There used to be 3 or 4 generations living in a house, and tradition was passed down. I'll give you an example. I was walking a vineyard in Tuscany with a biodynamic winemaker who I've gotten to know, and he has an amazing organic garden on the property, and he's got giant Roma tomatoes, and if you believe me, then he probably killing himself with the Roma tomatoes. And I said, "So
Next question.
what do you do with those tomatoes?" And he says, "Well, we make, you know, pasta sauce out of it." And I said, "Well, how do you do that? Just throw them in a pot?" He said, "Are you kidding?" He says, "You gotta peel them and you gotta take the seeds out of them." I said, "Well, why would you do that?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "That's the stuff that kills you." And I said, "Well, where did you learn that?" He says, "My mother." And I said, "Well, where did she learn that?" "My grandmother." Everybody knows you gotta peel and de-seed tomatoes before you make pasta sauce.
So, I mean, you basically answered my question. I said, you've declared war on tomatoes, um, so is Italian cuisine public enemy number one?
Not at all. Some of the healthiest people in the world, but they've learned how to detoxify these things, like most great cultures. So I just go back and look at, okay, how did you guys handle all this? And remember, like I wrote in the Plant Paradox, people miss the fact that way back when we used to have an amazing gut microbiome that could handle there was a war between plants not wanting to be eaten and their predators wanting to eat them. And what the predators had going for them was a microbiome bacteria that happened to love eating lectins. Believe it or not, there are gluten-eating bacteria. They're not here anymore. There are oxalate-eating bacteria. They love this stuff. They're not around anymore. So we used to have, I'll use a football analogy that I use with my patients. You ever watch football?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's the offensive line that's protecting the quarterback, and the linebackers are trying to get to the quarterback. If you got a great offensive line, they'll keep the linebacker off the quarterback long enough for him to throw the ball. We don't have an offensive line anymore. Those were our microbiome. They're gone. Now we got the water boy coming in and the quarterback's getting sacked constantly. So if you had a decent microbiome, we wouldn't be half as worried about what's happening to us now. In fact, if you look at super old people, they have the microbiome. These are people 105 years old. They have a microbiome that's like a 30-year-old. And they have a microbiome that's really good at eating what are called xenobiotics. For instance, plastics. They actually eat plastics. And people go, wait a minute, there aren't plastic eating bacteria. Well, of course there are. There are bacteria that are after carbon atoms. That's what they eat. And plastic is merely carbon, but they're gone.
So how do we repair the microbiome to get back to that space?
It takes a long process. When I first started this, I was naive. I thought I could cure leaky gut in 2 weeks. Most people, it takes a minimum of 9 months to a year. So you gotta do 2 separate things. You've gotta rebuild the microbiome, and naively, you would think if a forest burns down, and I like to think of our microbiome as a tropical rainforest with 10,000 different species all dependent on each other. You burn that down, well, we could plant some seedlings, like eat probiotics, but you'd be naive to think the forest will be back in a few weeks. It'll be 20, 30 years to get back to normal. And that's what we see in our patients. We can give them tons of probiotics, so almost nothing happens for 3 reasons. Number 1, you gotta have the right guys, which most people don't swallow. Number 2, you gotta give them what they need to eat, fertilizer. And number 3, you've gotta have precursors, what are called postbiotics. to give the guys who are going to make the great stuff that we need. One of those pieces is missing, it doesn't work. I can have people swallow Akkermansia muciniphila all day, every day. Come back 3 months later, look at their gut microbiome. There's still no Akkermansia in there. And they go, "What the heck? I've been taking this the best in the world. It's pendulums." I said, "Yeah, I love pendulum, but it's not growing." So one of my offices is in Palm Springs, California, desert. And I use the example. I'm going to sell you grass seed. You come back 3 months later and you say, "You sold me bad grass seed. It didn't grow." And I said, "Well, what did you do with it?" And they said, "Well, we took it out to the desert, spread it out, didn't grow." And I said, "Well, did you water it?" "No, you didn't tell me to." "Did you fertilize it?" "No, you didn't tell me to." So what do you expect? So we have a lot of people say, "Oh, you need probiotics." Sure enough, they take probiotics, nothing happened. "Oh, well, you need prebiotics to give probiotics what they want to eat." The Sonnenberg husband and wife team, microbiologists at Stanford, did that experiment with human beings. They gave them a great prebiotic fiber, inulin. Gut bugs love it. They looked at their inflammation markers. They looked at their gut microbiome diversity. You want a tropical rainforest. Nothing changed. And they go, "What the heck?" So they said, "Wait a minute, we must be missing something here. We must need postbiotics, fermented foods that produce products of bacterial eating." So they gave them yogurts and kefir and the prebiotic fiber. Then and only then did their gut microbiome diversity increase and their inflammation markers went down. So it's not as simple as everybody likes to think. You just can't weed and feed and seed.
So you claim certain vegetables are more dangerous than processed junk food.
I do.
The plant paradox, is it an elimination diet?
Some people accuse me that it's the ultimate. If you take that all plants hate us, then an elimination diet would be the final thing. And quite frankly, I use an elimination diet. In fact, my new book has my version of a carnivore diet that's called The Chicken and the Sea. I think. Well, so let me give you a great example. Not to change
Yeah, no, listen, we can freeform this.
the Indians who raised corn knew how bad corn was for them. So they always treated corn before they used it with either lye or they boiled it in lime juice. And that took the hull off, and it was called nixtamalization. It also bound the corn molecule so it couldn't bind with niacin, and there's a point of all this. So you've got hominy, and some people have heard of hominy grits.
Mm.
You then grind up hominy, and you make masa harina flour. So all corn traditionally was treated that way to eliminate the lectins in corn. Traditionally, tortillas were always made with masa flour. I learned this from Julia Child, the great chef. She would only go to a taco stand in Santa Barbara called La Super Rica, and they used masa flour to make their tortillas. And it's like, "Oh, what are you doing that for?" Well, they had learned how to detoxify. So let me give you an example of ancient wisdom. When Columbus brought corn back to the New World, the Italians could grow corn very well near Milan. It was great for growing corn. And they made polenta. But he didn't come back with the instructions on how to make it non-toxic. So there was a generation of children who were born with small brains, microcephaly, in this region because their families ate corn, and niacin, vitamin B3, is incredibly important for brain development. So there was a whole group of kids, 50 years of this, who were called cretins. And when I was growing up in the 50s, if you really thought a kid was stupid, you'd call him a cretin.
Yeah.
I don't think we can get away with it now. The French, who border Italy, were so impressed with this that they banned the use of corn for human consumption, and it was only allowed to be fed to pigs. And interesting, in France, it's very unusual to this day to see corn. My point is, the Indians had figured out how to detoxify corn so they could use it as a food source. Columbus didn't learn. And just like us, we don't learn how people detoxified things.
So how do we know we're getting a good corn chip?
If you actually see masa harina, you're safe. Safer.
Safer.
How's that?
What about GMO?
GMO, the problem with GMOs obviously were started so that Roundup, glyphosate, could be sprayed on plants. The problem with that is it wasn't so much the GMO was the problem, it was the Roundup. Now, most people are finally coming to the realization that Roundup is not sprayed on GMO crops primarily. It's sprayed on conventional crops as a desiccating agent. Crop is much easier to harvest if it's dry and dead. In industrial agriculture, when you have a $10 million harvesting machine, you want it on a field on a certain day. You can't wait for Mother Nature to ripen that crop. So you spray it with glyphosate, kill it, it dries, boom. Nobody wipes off the glyphosate. We feed it to our animals and we feed it to us because it's safe for human consumption because we don't use what's called the glyphosate, the pathway, the shikimate pathway that plants use to grow. Nobody from Monsanto or everybody to tell the FDA that, yes, we don't have the shikimate pathway, but bacteria have the shikimate pathway. And lo and behold, we know that glyphosate was patented as an antibiotic, not as a weed killer.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow. Mind blowing right there. We were talking about the two diets with the plant paradox in your new book. Can we pick up from there?
Sure. So, the plant paradox now 8 years old. And each of my books, I still see patients 6 days a week, weekends, Saturday, Sunday. Why don't I see them 7 days a week? Because I'm at Gundry MD. So, I do that to learn from my patients. So I go, hey, I've learned this, or you've taught me this. I want you to try this. I want to see what blood work shows. I want to look at your microbiome. I want to look at your leaky gut. I want to look at your autoimmune markers, and let's see what works. And so with each book, I try to pass on the knowledge I've learned over the years. And so this time, so many of my patients came in for, say, one issue, um, and another one of their issues resolved. And what was interesting is a lot of the issues had to do with mental health, whether it was depression, whether it was anxiety, whether it was addiction. And lo and behold, we may have been after some other problem, but early on I said, I think these other problems, like Hippocrates said, are coming from your gut. And then as we saw that leaky gut got fixed, as we saw the gut microbiome diversity get better, lo and behold, we got people off of antidepressants, or their anxiety went away, or their addictive behavior went away. And so then in this book, I went in, a deep dive into, oh my gosh, there's a addictive microbiome. There's a nicotine microbiome. There's even a marijuana microbiome that I didn't write about. There's an opioid microbiome. There's an alcohol-seeking microbiome. And they actually control our behavior to seek this stuff out for them. Woo!
You've been talking about the microbiome forever.
Yep.
Why is it that people are just catching on now? Are they following you and mimicking, or is something actually happening as a revolution?
Well, it's interesting. The term microbiome was actually first coined in 2002. It's that new. And the Human Microbiome Project only finished in 2017. And what that's done is just it's opened up this floodgate of research because we didn't even know these guys were there. We didn't know how many of them there were because we couldn't grow them in a petri dish. And we didn't know what compounds they made. And so with each literally every month, there's something new and exciting coming out. For instance, I just sent my team like 5 papers about, for instance, osteoporosis, which is an epidemic, is actually caused by leaky gut. And if you fix leaky gut, osteoporosis goes away. Honest. And you go, "Oh, come on. No, it's because you're a little old lady and, you're not strength training or anything like that." And we have little old ladies who grow their bones back once we seal their leaky gut.
That's incredible.
Well,
Yeah.
Hippocrates knew this.
Well, you keep pointing back, like, a lot of stuff we knew, right? Are you really reversing aging or just slowing it down?
So I did this in my talk, but I think the important part is aging is actually caused by the wall of the gut becoming porous. And this had been proven in the ultimate aging model, which is a little worm called C. elegans. C. elegans lives as long as the wall of its gut is intact, as it has its own microbiome. It's only one cell thick, just like ours is. And as that wall begins to get porous, as it begins to break down, then bacteria, other compounds get through the wall of the gut. You can actually watch the worm slow down, become less interested in food, become less mobile, and then it dies. All of the research that's been done in longevity, particularly in compounds, in eating, in fasting, was first done in C. elegans. And everything that's happened in C. elegans has been reproduced in all animals, even fruit flies, rats, mice, even rhesus monkeys. So if that's what causes C. elegans to die and age, then that's what I'm interested in. And the best way to summarize Hippocrates' all disease begins in the gut is to look at it the other way. Death begins in the gut. So if you want to slow down aging, you keep the wall intact.
Do you believe veganism is a nutritional cult?
No, I take care of a bunch of vegans because I was a professor at Loma Linda, which is a vegetarian vegan institution. But most of the vegans I see have some of the worst disease I see. It's because they're not eating the right plants. Can you do it? Yeah, you can. I have some really healthy vegans once we flip around their choices or once we detoxify the plant compound.
How do we have a really healthy vegan diet? I know Furman is doing it, but I think, when you look at it, you're missing proteins a lot, and if you to get your proteins are very carb based, so it seems like it's a negatable lifestyle.
It's you can get really high quality vegan protein. I have a protein powder that uses non-lectin proteins like spirulina, like hemp protein. And so you can do it. It's a lot of work. And most vegans are pasta grain and beanitarians. And that's why they're so sick. So we get that out of their vegan diet or modify it and they'll do fine.